Okay, welcome everyone to our understanding of Talmud. Last week we were involved in our new Mishnah, Mishnah Bays, and I was explaining to the people before we started the class that the translation that we're using is by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and he translates the Gemora by using this word elucidate. Does anyone know what elucidate means? The Gemara elucidates.
It sort of like presents it, it enlightens it, it expounds upon it.
Excellent, excellent, exactly. Now, when I looked in the dictionary, look what it said. To make lucid, it's from the word lucid, which means to put light on something, to make clarify, right? Especially by explanation or analysis. Look at that. That was just in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, one of the explanations. That means that the clarification is done through an explanation or analysis. Now that's very interesting because that's exactly what the Gemara does. The Gemara is trying to understand the Mishnah. The Mishnah is trying to elucidate understand the Torah, and the Gemara, the Mishnah just tells us cases and laws, but doesn't tell us how it got to those conclusions. And it also writes in a very brief manner. And the Gemara elucidates, which means through a process of analysis, it explains what the Mishnah means. A very, very big Kiddush, because here's an example of, I'm going to show you something and I'm going to get back to our text. I just want to show you something that I'm working on. See, in another piece we did the dilemma. The dilemma is when you present all the sides of understanding a situation and show that no matter how you explain the situation, you will not get a truthful answer. So this was a while ago, we gave this example. The doctor prescribed half a tablet of aspirin for Shmuel. So his mother presented the doctor with the following dilemma. Shmuel either has fever or does not have fever. Okay, that's called a sentence which is machalek in Hebrew, an either or statement. If Shmuel does not have fever, he should not take any aspirin at all.
What's it called? Either or is what?
In Hebrew, it's called a in English, in Hebrew it's called a machalek, A or B. A or B. A or B.
Got it.
Okay. I forgot the English name. Sorry, but it's okay. A or B. Okay.
Comparison.
Excuse me.
Comparison.
Binary.
No, it is binary, and it's not a comparison. It is giving you two alternatives. It is either A or B. Okay. Okay. Something is either A or B. Okay. Now, that's the first proposition. So Shmuel, either his mother says Shmuel either has fever or does not have fever. Okay, it's Shmuel either does or does not have fever, A or B, or A or not A, doesn't matter. Same thing. You present all the possibilities. It could be A or B, or it could be A or not A. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you present all the possibilities. And then you show that each of the possibilities that you presented leads to a false conclusion. It means a conclusion against what you said. Why? Because if Shmuel does not have fever, he should not take any aspirin at all. And if Shmuel does have fever, he should take one whole tablet of aspirin. So that's called a dilemma, when you present both sides of a situation and you show that it contradicts what the person said. So the doctor said, take a half a tablet, and the mother said, wait a minute, either he has fever, in which case you should take a whole tablet, he doesn't have fever, and you shouldn't take any tablet, right? So that's logic. In logic, that's called, in English, it's called a dilemma, okay? Or in Hebrew, it's called mamanav shach. Mamanav shach means no matter which way you turn. But the proper logical word is dilemma. Now, the question is, how do you deny a dilemma? Okay, so there's two ways of denying a dilemma. One is, now in English, there's a phrase called going through the horns of the bull. The first phrase, when someone presents you a dilemma in English, is called being impaled on the horns of a dilemma. Okay. Okay, this is what it's called in English logic. Being in, oops, that's the wrong language. It's not going to help me. Okay. Oops.
How do you deny A? It's either an either or an or.
Just 1 second. I'll explain to you. Being, okay, impaled on horns of a dilemma. Okay. Now, we're going to talk directly to your question. Okay, and I hope I don't have anything else open, but the way life goes, that's where it goes. Screen sharing. Okay, what can I tell you? I hope it makes
Why does the
sense.
next line say C or D? What's D?
Okay, that's what I want to explain slowly. Okay, so when someone presents you with a dilemma and tells you no matter which way you do it, it's not going to work, whether you're selling something or you're offering them some medical advice or any advice, is wait a minute, if I do X, if I do what you say, it's going to work, and if I don't do what you say, it's also not going to work. There's nothing I can do. I'm caught. Anyway, it's called being impaled on the horns of the dilemma. You have two sides, and no matter which way you go, you're going to get a better result, okay? So what I call proposition A is Shmuel either has fever or doesn't have fever. Are you with me? What did you ask me? Oh, how did you go through the horns? Okay. Now, the first part of a dilemma is built with an A or B statement, okay? Either he has or he doesn't have fever. The two horns of dilemma bring each side to a false conclusion. Well, if he doesn't have fever, he should not take any aspirin at all. And if he does have fever, he should take a whole aspirin. Okay. So now to respond to a dilemma, you have two ways of responding. One is called going through the horns of the bull, which means you deny that there's only two possibilities, having fever and not having fever, okay? Like you say, it's not binary as you brought up, but there's something of having a little fever, okay? That's one way of doing it. You say that there's a middle term. There's not only two terms, there's a middle. Don't tell me it's a binary, there's a middle. And the other way of doing it is called grabbing the bull by the horns. Okay, and that means you deny the two propositions set. Either one of the two propositions. Okay, you'll say no. If he doesn't have fever, he shouldn't take aspirin. It's not true because he has some other indications, which means that he's getting sick, not only fever. That's not the only indication. Or if Shmuel does have fever, he should take a whole aspirin. Well, he only has some. Not everyone who doesn't have fever shouldn't, everyone that does have fever has to take a whole one. He's a young child and he doesn't need a whole one, okay? So that's called grabbing the bull by the horns. You show that the if-then proposition doesn't work, okay? So that's a logical process. When you're dealing with people, you do it intuitively and you don't even think about it. But when you're dealing with text and understanding text, and you want to elucidate a text, so one way that the Chachamim do it is by presenting a dilemma and showing that both sides cannot work. Okay, and then they either have to go through the horns, or they have to deny one, or deny that there's only two sides. Okay, or excuse me, going through the horn means that there's more than two sides. The other one, which is grabbing the bull by the horns, means it's not true that if I hold A, that B is the result. You can have other results. Okay, now that's the format of the thinking. Okay, now in the Ramchal over here, I'm saying a lot of things, and I hope.
Can I just repeat it?
Yeah,
just to make
yeah,
sure I-
please.
Okay, so the mother says to the doctor, my kid's not feeling well. And the doctor says, does he have fever? He doesn't have fever. And to go through the horns of the bull is for the mother to say, look, it's not that he has fever, but he's in pain and discomfort. So that's going through the horns of the bull.
Now that's your example, but not my example, okay?
That's my example. No, and then
You want to say your example. Okay.
I'm saying my example because I'm trying to show you how you go through the horns of the bull, because you
I
didn't
understand.
give us an
Okay.
answer, right? You just said
Okay.
A or B. So
Oh,
I'm
so
showing
tell
you
me-
how
yes.
I'm going through the horns of the bull. I'm denying
Please do it.
proposition A.
Tell me what the statement is. That gives me two possibilities, and
So-
tell me how
So
you're
the
denying.
I call the doctor, and the doctor says, does he
Yes.
have fever or not?
Right.
And I'm like, well, he's warm, but he doesn't technically have fever, but he's in pain. So he needs something. And so that's how I'm going through the horns of the bulls. I'm denying proposition A, that an aspirin should be given just because of fever or not given because of no fever. And then I'm denying, and then to grab the bull by the horns, he doesn't have fever, so I'm not accepting that. I'm denying that. And he doesn't technically have fever, but he has pain. So I'm basically saying he should take what about a half an aspirin? So that's grabbing the bull by the horns, is what is sort of the philosophy that I think you're getting at, the way you're describing it, because, right? Because you're
Yes.
denying A or B. I'm saying, what about a half an aspirin for the pain? So I'm denying proposition A to go through the horns of the bull, and then I'm grabbing the horns by offering an alternative.
Okay, good. So now you can do either one of those. Usually they just do one of the three. Either you go through the horns and you show there's another thing. You say that there's only two possibilities. Like in my example, I'm gonna use my example if you don't mind. Okay, this goes straight in here. Okay, so the mother says there's only two possibilities. And the two possibilities are him having fever or not having fever, right? And if he has fever, then let him take a whole. And if he doesn't have fever, he shouldn't take any. So now by denying this one, either he has fever, does not have fever, or what can you say? You could say he can have a small fever. And you wanted to say an alternative. He has pain, for instance, right? So you can say that those are not the only two possibilities, right? You could say there's something called elevated fever, okay? Elevated. It's not enough to be 36.7 or whatever it is, 98.6, but it's still elevated. It's called elevated. Okay, so in other words, you're denying the binariness of the situation. In the other situation, you're denying the conclusion of him having or not having fever. In other words, you're telling me that all people who do not have fever should not take aspirin at all. It's not true. Of course, as you said, maybe he has pain, maybe he has some other indication, or all people that do have fever should take whole aspirins. Well, that's true. Children don't take whole aspirins. So this is the classic, what's called a rebuttal. Okay, the classic rebuttal to a dilemma. You either give another possibility, not A or B. You say that there's a C, D, E, F, G somewhere in the middle, or you deny the consequences of those two statements. And you say it's not true that if he has fever, he shouldn't take any aspirin at all. Or you say it's not true that if he does have fever, he should take a whole down. Those are denying the 2 horns. Now, I'll show you what I mean in our example, okay? Let's go back to our example here, okay? And first, I'm going to look at it inside and present the dilemma.
Rabbi, your
Okay.
camera's off, by the way.
Oh, my camera's off also? No. Isn't that nice? Thank you for telling me. Okay, let's not do it here. Okay. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now let's do this application in the piece of Gemora we're talking about. Okay, so we have to, as I always like to do, I like to build up the logic here. Okay, so the main statement we have comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the statement called shechati b'shmiraso v'charti es nisko. That's the statement we're going to deal with. That statement says anyone who is obligated to watch something must pay. Okay, when it does that. Okay, that's what the statement says. Now, here's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara gives an elucidation of that statement. In other words, the Gemara now, here's the Gemara after this blue line. The Gemara brings a brisa, and the brisa is going to elucidate, to explain that statement. Okay, so the brisa first starts with the statement. It quotes the statement, Kol shechati b'shmiraso kshati es nisko, and then it says the word ketzad. How can we understand this statement? Okay, what does the statement mean? So that's the brisa now is giving us what's called a parish, an explanation of what the Mishnah is saying. Is that clear to everybody?
What's
The
Kate? Why or something?
Ketzad is how so.
Oh, okay.
Okay, how so? In other words, explain to me what this statement means. It's a little bit cryptic. If I were to tell you what it means that if you have a dangerous object that you have to watch, if it does damage, you have to pay for it. That's how I would explain that statement very simply, correct? Very simply. Okay. Now, comes along the brisa and does not explain it simply. What does the brisa say? I'll check. The brisa tells, I am now going to explain that statement. What it means is the following: a shore and a boar, meaning an ox and a pig, shemosran lecherish shot of a cotton, that the owner handed over to a deaf, insane, or a minor. These are all people who are classically incapable of guarding things. Okay, they're irresponsible. So here we have the owner of these 2 dangerous items, the shore and the boar, hands over these items to these any one of these 3 people, and damage occurs. So the law is the owner, since he handed over these items to these 3 people, have to pay for the damage. That's the first part of the Bryce's explanation. But the Bryce goes further, and it says, "Masha'ain kain be'esh." The law I just told you. Oops, someone had that mic around. The law I just told you about shore and boar is not true of fire. Translation: if the owner of a fire handed over to a dumb, a minor, or an insane person, and then that fire did damage, there you don't have to pay. That is the explanation of the Mishnah according to the Bryce. Okay, that's what it says. So I made my little chart here.
So are you saying the fire is grabbing the bull by the horns?
No, not at all. We haven't,
Okay.
we
Okay.
haven't gotten to that yet.
All right,
First,
all right.
I'm just doing a substitution of words for the original statement. I'm just doing the substitution, not I. The Brisa is substituting what a set of words into to explain the original case. Okay, it's saying, what did the Mishnah mean by what I'm obligated by? I have to pay. It means what I'm obligated by, i.e., a shore and a bore, I'm obligated to watch. If I don't do the watching by handing it over to an insane person or a cousin, then I have to pay. But the Mishnah, the Brisa goes further and says, if I hand over a fire to the same three people, all of a sudden I don't have to pay. Okay, that's what the Brisa says. Now, it doesn't explain why. It just says those are the facts. So I made my little chart. If you have an ox in a pit and your ox and pit, you hand it over to the deaf, insane, or a child, and it does damage. So I call it the damage of the guardian and the result. Very good. The law is that you, the owner, have to pay. However, if you have a fire and you hand it over to these same three people and it does damage, all of a sudden you don't have to pay. That's what the Brisa does to explain the first line. Okay. Now, I think you'll admit that this is very hard to understand. Why? I mean, we can understand the first part of the Brisa. Here, a person has dangerous items, an ox in a pit. He tells these people who are incapable of guarding to here, have some fun with my ox in my pit. And of course, since they're incapable, they do damage. So the owner who did that has to pay. That makes a lot of sense. But the next part doesn't make sense. The person has a nice fire, a burning torch, and he says to his kid, hey, have some fun. So the kid says it. Okay. We tell, yeah, sure. And what happens? He goes and he burns down his friend's barn. All of a sudden, the owner is exempt. How could that be? Doesn't make any sense. I think you'll admit it doesn't make any sense. Okay. That is, however, the presentation of the Brisa. That's the Brisa's explanation of the Mishnah. Okay. That's what it is. But it's very hard to understand. So now we need what's called an elucidation. We need someone to analyze this to come up with a reasonable understanding, correct? Because as it is, you can't figure out why, if you handed a fire to someone, to these three people, to a child, all of a sudden you're exempt. Is that clear up to this point? So we had a statement in the Mishnah, which things that I'm responsible for to watch, I have to pay if it does damage. And we have an explanation of that statement, which does not talk about the person himself, but talks about handing it over since I had an obligation to watch. And I didn't do that watching by handing it over to a person that was incapable of watching, then I have to pay. That was fine. That's what the Brisa says. If an ox in a pit that I hand over to a person, I have to watch the ox in the pit. If I gave it to a person who is incapable of doing that, then of course I have to pay. But the Brisa goes further and says something very strange. It says, if I hand over a fire to these same three people, all of us, and it does damage, I don't have to pay. So that is what we call an enigma. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, everyone understand what the number one, what the Brisa do and why it doesn't make sense? Any questions up to that point? So now the next slide here is the Gemora elucidates this text, which means it explains the text through analyzing. Now that was my big kiddush. I looked up the word elucidation because I always, like you guys, it means to clarify something, to bring light on something. And generally, But there, one of the definitions there in the Webster's Dictionary was to make lucid, especially by explanation or analysis. I said, wow, I'm so happy. Why am I so happy? Because this is what the Gemara is doing. The Gemara is trying to explain statements through analysis. And people don't understand that. They think that the Gemara is just talking, having a good time, talking about different cases, but it's not. The Gemara is taking the Mishnah and trying to explain it through a system of analysis. Okay. Now, the Mishnah does a similar thing, i.e., an explanation of the Chumash, but the Mishnahs usually don't tell you their analysis. They just tell you what, when the Chumash says that a shore gores someone, you have to pay the first time half and the second times 3. So the Mishnah will tell you all the details, but it doesn't go through a system of analysis. It just tells you cases and laws. The Gemara goes through a system of analysis. So it now takes the Mishnah and analyzes it. It also takes the Chumash and analyzes it. Now, as we said in the beginning, it says an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That means literally, if you damage someone's eye, we have to poke out the other person's eye. And the Gemara says through a system of analysis, it's not true. It means that you have to give money for money. But it works out that analysis with around 3 or 4 pages of Gemara. It wasn't so simple, because we always prefer the literal meaning. But if the literal meaning through analysis comes out to be false, then we have to go to a secondary meaning. Okay. So now now that we understand what the case was, let's look at the dilemma. The dilemma is that the Gemara is going to present 2 ways of understanding this brisa, and it's going to say no matter which way you look at it, you'll come to an absurd conclusion. So let's see what it says. Okay. So the Gemara says, hold on. Well, what is this text talking about? There's one in the brisa. And it says, Elamba means if you're going to tell me that it's talking about a shore kashore. That means it's talking about a shore, an ox that was tied up. And the bore, the pit, was covered up. Right? And very nice. That's why you're chayav, correct? Of course, because you gave dangerous items to a child. I'm not going to say all 3 things all the time, just too much for me to say. So you gave these 3 things. So, oh, sure, that's very nice. You're chayav. However, the kavaise gabe shor gechelis. What would be an analogous to a closed pit? Excuse me, I said this wrong. It started actually on the other foot. I take back what I said. If the shore is kashore, right? It's a guarded shore you're giving him to these 3 people. And if the bore is covered, so it's a guarded bore, a guarded pit that you're giving it to him. So the question is, well, why should you be chayav in such a case? You gave them things which were properly guarded. Okay.
So, Rabbi,
Go ahead.
question.
Yes.
All right. So basically, we're saying the ox in the pit are covered or tethered. Are we saying that the fire is an ember and not an open flame?
Yes. The reason why is because the affirmation and the denial have to be talking about the same subject. So it said that the shore and the ox in the pit have one law, that you're chayav, which is not true of the fire. So it must be that the ox, pit, and fire are talking about the same type of case, or else there's no analogy. Don't say which is not true of the fire, because it's talking about different circumstances. Okay. So
it's exempt if it's an ember. It's not exempt if it's an open flame on a torch.
Exactly. That's why I corrected myself. The first explanation that the Gemara gives of this brisa is to say that the shore and the bore are actually covered up or tied up. The second explanation, the second side is that the aish has to be like the bore, and therefore it is a coal. A coal means that it's an ember, it's a dying ember. So it's much because dying embers die out. So it's not anything that's going to cause damage. I mean,
So when you say disrupts protection, and I see on the top line that disrupts and protection are separated, so it looks like it just says protection. I think I'd move that to the next line.
yeah, I'd like
But,
to. I'm
But
getting
my question is, disrupt protection means that it's because it's covered.
Okay, this is my question. Now, first of all, you have to know the Gemara does not say anything except we must be talking about a case where both things, all three things are being in a state of watched. Okay, so let me do my chart here. Okay, let's say all the Gemara says is the following. If we posit that the ox is tied and the pit is covered, so that means he gave him something that was not dangerous at the moment because it was all tied up, correct?
What does disrupt protection mean? I don't understand.
Okay, I'm going to explain that, okay? I just want to get the case straight. The analogy would be an ember, okay? In other words, all three things here, an ox tied up, a pit that's covered, and an ember are all things that were given to these three people in a safe position, okay? Now, why do you pay with the ox in the pit and not the fire? Okay, so now here's a factor that the Gemara does not say. I wrote this factor in. Okay, I wrote it in. The factor is not spelled out by the Gemara. I said, well, I'll explain to you why if, let's take one of the two. Let's say the ox is tied up. So why would you have to pay? Why does the owner have to pay? He gave him an ox that was tied up. So I said the owner has to pay because the child unties the ox. That's how.
And that's the disruption. That's the disruption.
That's a disruption of the protection, correct?
Okay.
The child is a disruptor.
Oh, I see. Blow on the ember makes it a fire. Same thing. Okay.
Oh, now the analogous case would be that the child blows the ember. That's like untying the ox, and that would also be a disruption of the protection. Are you with me now?
Yep.
Okay. The only problem is that I need smaller text.
No, you know what?
Okay.
If you shrink the box, Rabbi,
It'll do it automatically.
It'll do an auto wrap for you.
Yeah, I think it doesn't because I tried that, and what happens? Oh,
Here.
yeah, then it auto wrapped it, but you see, then you saw it on
Put a
the
space after ox. Put the cursor between ox and disrupts and hit the space bar one time.
You want me to put it on the next line?
There you go. That looks better.
Okay, great. Okay, good, fine. But I just wanted to explain that whenever we're dealing, you see, we're dealing in Hashem's laws. He's either telling us things to do or not to do. Okay, so in every law, you have a case and a law. You should know these things. This is one of the first things that I learned in the yeshiva. Case, law, factor, and source. Okay, so every case has to have a law. So there's two cases here and two different laws. In the first case, you have to pay. In the second case, you don't have to pay. But what is the factor? That's called the factor. Means, well, why do you have to pay? You see, that's called a factor. Now, in Mishnahs, I told you or this price, it doesn't tell us the factor. It just tells us the laws. It just tells us, and it doesn't even tell us what the position of these three items were. It's the brisa that's telling us. It's the Gemara that's explaining this brisa and saying, look, there can be only two possibilities. Either he handed these three objects over when they were in a guarded position, or an unguarded position. There's the beginning of my dilemma. Okay, so now if he handed all these three objects over in a guarded position, i.e. the ox was tied, the pit was covered, and the fire was an ember, so then we can understand why you're chayav, because it must be that the child uncovered the pit or untied the ox. So you're responsible. But then we don't understand why you're patur, you're exempt with the ember, because the child could also blow on the ember and cause a fire. You with me? Okay, I'm going to go to the second part, and then I'm going to show you this thinking outside. But this is it. This is classic Gemara. When I say classic Gemara, this is happens hundreds, if not thousands of times in Gemara. You know, it's using analysis to explain a text. So this is using a dilemma. It's saying, look, on one side, you'll tell me that these all three items were in a state of protection. So what are you going to tell me? I can understand why. I could understand why you're chayav, because it must be that just like you have to pay because the kid must have disrupted it. So if he disrupted the ox by untying it and the pit by uncovering it, so he should also be chayav. Why is he exempt? Doesn't make sense.
So is the factor the ketza?
The factor in the Gemara is only the case.
Didn't know the ketza.
Yeah, yes.
How so? Ketza.
Yes. Wait, here, now I have to show you here. Ketzad is the language that the Brisa used to explain the Mishnah. Are you with me?
Yeah, that's the factor.
Oh, no. That's not going to be the factor. That's just going to be the case. The Mishnah.
Oh, that's the case. Oh,
the Mishnah, that's the case. Only telling you the case. Okay, because we don't know the case of this. The Mishnah just told us a law. If I'm obligated to watch, I'm obligated to pay. There's no case. Well, what am I obligated to watch? So the Brisa is telling you what you're obligated to watch. Okay, the shore and the boar you're obligated to watch, and you have to pay. However, says the Brisa, the Aish, which you're also obligated to watch, you don't have to pay. Okay, that's what the Brisa says. Comes along the Gemara, and now is going to talk about factor. It's not going to talk about factor yet. It's going to talk about two possible explanations.
Oh, I see. I see now. I see. I got it.
Okay, two possible explanations. Either all three things were in a state of being watched, or all three things were not in a state of being watched. And no matter which way you explain this brisa, it's not going to make sense. Why? Because if all three things are in a state of being watched, there's no reason to say that the fire should be exempt. If you're going to tell me the shore has to pay, the person who gave the shore and the pit, the ox in the pit, has to pay, because the kid is going to play with those animals. So you'll have to say the same thing with the fire, with the ember, right? You know, he's going to play with it. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if you tell me that both items were in a state of not being watched, okay, meaning the ox was untied and the pit was uncovered, and the fire was a real flame, it wasn't an ember. So if you're going to tell me all three things were in a state of not being watched, so then how can he be exempt? I don't understand.
Oh, I see. That's the factor that changes the law from paying to exempt.
You got it? That's the factor here. And the Gemara really asks a much more difficult problem. Reish Lakish happens to say that if a person hands a flame to a child, then he has to pay. Okay, he has to pay. So Reish Lakish is in Amara, and he said that when you hand a flame to someone, you have to pay. Okay, so we have two things. In logic, this is not working out. Okay, so now let's go to the solution that the Gemara brings, and then we'll try to analyze it. The Gemara now goes back to the first horn. The first horn is, hey, everything was protected, right? We said everything's protected, so how come you don't have to pay when it comes to Aish, when it comes to fire? So the Gemara says, no, we're going to go back to the first horn, and we're going to grab the bull by the horns, but not by both horns, one of the horns. We're going to grab the left horn, whatever it is, the one that says it's covered, okay? And we're going to say, no, really, the Brisa is talking about when all three items were in a state of protection, okay? That the shore and the boar were either tied up or covered, i.e. the ox was tied up and the boar was covered. And the analogous case would be with a fire that's a gechelis, meaning an ember, and it's going to go out. So they're all really in a protected state. You said to me, well, why should one be chayav and one should be potter? I'll tell you why. Because the shore, its way is to become untied, and the boar, its way is to become uncovered. But the way of the ember is to slowly become extinguished. Okay? All right? That's what the Gemara solves the dilemma. So what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? It means that a shore is always moving around, right? He's always moving around. He's pulling on his chain, like a dog on a chain. Okay? And since he's always moving around, even though you gave it to the insane person, the shore can become untied, not by that person, but just by moving around. Okay. The same thing with a pit. When people walk over pits, an animal works over pits, and over time, the covering gets loose, shakes, and falls down. Okay, so both those items, even though you gave it to these people who can't guard in a state that was protected now, in a while, they're going to become dislodged or untied. And therefore, you should have considered that when you gave it to those people, and that's why you're chayav. That's why you're obligated to pay. However, when you gave them the ember, there, over time, the ember becomes less and less dangerous. It eventually is going to go out completely. So there, you don't have to pay because it's just going to extinguish itself. Okay, so that is how the Gemara answers the problem. So it's grabbing the bull by the horns. You thought that when you gave a shore and a boar that was protected, there was no reason why you're chayav. And the answer is, the reason why you have to pay is because the shore and the boar can come loose. Okay, either the covering will come loose or the knot will come loose. But when it comes to the ember, it's going to die out. So you don't have to wait a little while. It's going to just dissipate. It'll be nothing. So you don't have to watch it. Okay, that's the solution of the Gemara. Okay, so now what I wanted to show you, and most people, what I'm showing you, most people do not do. Okay, most people don't spell out the logic that the Gemara is using. They just read the text, they intuitively understand it, and then they go on to the next issue. However, what I'm trying to help you do, and I help all my students, is to appreciate what's called contemplation. See, nowadays, Michael Bruce all over Shalom used to say, immediate gratification is too slow. That's when we make a joke. Okay, no one has time to think anymore. They want to go to GPT chat and they want to go to the internet. All they want is answers to things. They don't want to think. You give them some problem to think, he says, "Oh, go speak to somebody who knows something." I don't know. They're trained not to think. They're trained to look for answers. Okay, not all people and not all schools. And when you go to higher education, hopefully they teach you how to evaluate. If you're a doctor or an engineer or a professional, you're supposed to be able to analyze things, not just to give quick answers off the top of your head. And you're also, of course, there's simple problems and more detailed problems. Now, when it comes to learning, so I think it starts with davening. We have so much information that you're just taught to get the information, whatever it says, and then read the halacha and tell you what to do. It's like, the gathering of the information and the actual halacha have no connection. Now, that's only a untrained eye, but the trained eye knows how to come to how the Gemara comes to its conclusion. So now I'm going to show you now something again that most people will not show you, not because first of all it's not so easy to do. I spent a lot of time doing it. Okay, but this is what the Ramchal says to do. Okay, this is what the Ramchal says to do. Okay. So here I have now outlined the steps of the Gemara in the basic moves, okay? The first is the statement of our Mishnah. The statement of our Mishnah says, all things that I'm obligated to guard, I must pay for their damage, okay? That's the statement in the Mishnah. There's an inference from that statement. The Ramchal explains, an inference means something that even though it's not said, is implied. If I say to you that only things that I'm obligated to guard, I must pay for, so we can make the inference that things that I'm not obligated to guard, I do not have to pay for, okay? Because you tell me all the things that I'm obligated to guard, then I must pay, and things which are not obligated to guard, which is an inference. It doesn't say that. A matter of fact, we could discuss the whole logic of it, but I'm not going to get into that. Let's just say that that's an inference statement, okay? Now, the Brisa now does what's called in English substitution. You guys did all, I'm sure you all went to the basic mathematics classes or algebra, right? And it's called substitution. You just substitute one term for the next, okay? So it comes along the Brisa and it's now going to substitute terms for things that I'm obligated to watch and things that I'm not obligated to watch. That's what the Brisa does. So the Brisa now gives a clarification to our Mishnah, okay? And it says, adding details. For an ox in a pit given to a child, I must pay when either damage, okay? That's what it says. It adds details into the general statement. Just doesn't say all things I'm able to pay. It tells me which things I am obligated to pay for. I'm obligated to pay for the ox in the pit given to a child. Okay, good. The inference that it says the Brisa is, however, for a fire given to a child, I do not have to pay when it damages. Those are the two statements of clarification of the Brisa. Comes along the Gemara now, and it elucidates, I like that word, it uses analysis to explain the true meaning of the Brisa. What type of analysis? First, it attacks the statement on its face value and says, no matter which way I explain the statement is not going to make sense. And then after it attacks the statement, it resolves it. Now, obviously, maybe not so obviously to some, there must have been some switch from the attack to the resolution, right? Someone gives you a problem in math or in whatever business you're in, in medicine, whatever it is, and they think there's no way out. There's no way. And you all of a sudden pop up, well, you don't know, there is a way out. So what did you now? If it's two doctors arguing or two mathematicians or two engineers, they must have had a good reason to say it won't work. One had a good reason to say it won't work, and the other one had a good reason to say it would work, okay? But however, if the one who said that it's going to work has to get around the fact that the other person had a very good objection. Okay, what I'm teaching you here is things that took me so long to understand. No one explained them. I was in a class with many people, and it wasn't 35, but 12. So some of them learned Gemara since they were born, and me, I came in, I didn't know what they were doing. I never learned logic. I mean, I was logical. I went to school. I did okay. I was a good student, but I mean, I never took calcium logic. And yes, what do you want to say, Doug?
So
Okay.
I get the fact that tied or covered is paid and ember is exempt.
Yes.
But what if it say untied or uncovered pays and the flame is exempt?
Good. Now, this is what I'm trying to say. Substitution. I'm sorry, I got a little carried away. Substitution. Okay, again, substitution.
You mean you're using an inference by means of elucidating the
Exactly.
lemma to determine, but I'm losing you, and because you're saying originally you said that the protection of the ox in the pit were covered and tethered, and ember, and now I don't understand why we're making flame exempt. Oh, exempt from where it is now. You mean reversed? No, because it doesn't say. I still don't understand why that.
Well, let's go very clearly, okay? I get lost very easily.
Just
Things
go down
that-
to the flame part. I got the top part. No
You
problem.
got this part, no problem. You got the Bryce?
Yeah, got that.
The
got
Bryce,
that.
it just adds the ox and the pit
Got
into the thing, right?
I got
Okay.
got
Now the Gemara says it doesn't make sense. Why, if the Gemara says there's only two possibilities. These three items were in a state of being guarded or not. There's only two possibilities. Well, I don't know. It just told me that an ox in a pit are chayev and a fire is not. Well, wait a minute, says the Gemara. There's only two possibilities. Fire means real fire, or which means that it's not protected, or fire means ember and it is protected. The shore is either tied up or it's not tied up. There's only two possibilities. The shore is either tied up or not tied up, and the pit is covered or not covered. There's only, and the fire is either a fire or a flame. What does that mean? It means no matter which way you try to explain this brisa, you're going to come to an absurd conclusion. Why? Because if all three things, here's the first, if all three things are in a state of being guarded, okay, let's start with that position. That means the ox is tied up, that's a state of being guarded, is that correct? Is that correct?
Yeah. Tied, covered, ember. I got it. Okay.
Those
I got that.
those are all. Now, if all those three things are in a state of being guarded, why would you pay for the ox and the pit? Why are you paying? You gave it to him a state of guarding. You'll tell me, like I told you, that maybe the kid will uncover or untie the knot. That's why you're
Blow in
paying.
the flame.
That's-
Right.
Oh, so then you should blow in the flame and you should be chayav. Why you should be obligated? Explain to me, how come he has to pay for the pit and the ox if
Because he
they're
had
covered?
covered it.
Oh, so the flame he should have to pay because he blew it.
Correct.
It doesn't make sense. So now maybe what the brisa meant was the ox was untied and the pit was uncovered and the flame was not an ember but a real flame. Correct? That's the other possibility.
And when
Make
you
up-
say exempt for the flame, do you mean exempt from not being paid for? That means he has to-
Exempt means he does not have to pay. No pay.
No,
Exempt
but if
means
he
he
blows
does
on
not.
it, he has to pay. You're saying he's always exempt? Because it seems to me like he blew on it.
Does he, wait, hold on, in a fire, we know that there's two laws here. One law for the ox and the pit and one law for the fire. There's two different laws here. Now, the question is, under what circumstances are these laws being said? We know that there's a law for the ox in the pit and there's a law for the fire. But were they guarded when they were given to these three people or not? There's
Rav,
only, yes, go ahead.
I have a question. So trying to do this analysis, if you
Yes.
look at when the Baal left these three things, let's start with the
Ox.
shore and the boar. Yeah, he left those two. They were guarded. because they were tethered and were covered.
That's
Right.
correct. And what's the law?
So is the car is
Yes, to
is,
pay. The owner has to pay, correct?
no. Before we even get there,
Okay, good.
I'm starting at the very basic,
Okay, start with the basics. Yes, please.
at the foundation.
Yes.
I'm an owner, and my
Yes.
shore and my bore, I left in a I left them in a condition that were tied down and it was covered.
Correct,
So technically, I left them in a watched position, right?
correct.
And the fire,
But just 1 second. Oh, yeah, tell me
Yeah.
about the fire.
so the fire is not, when I left it, whether it's an ember or a flame, it's not in a watched position, it's a fire,
Oh,
right?
Now, that's very interesting what you say. The way that the Gemara is learning is that an ember is analogous to the tied ox in the covered pit, and it is in a guarded position.
Okay, so it's in a guarded position, okay. So
Okay,
then.
so maybe I
So-
confused you by writing the word
No,
fire.
you cleared it. You cleared it up. I just want to make sure you didn't confuse me. I just want to
No.
make sure that I understood the logic that each of them were left in a guarded position. So
Exactly.
an ember was guarded. It's gonna flame out. It's gonna burn out.
Yeah, and ember's
So-
going to die out very short,
Right.
right?
So then the next step is
Now, there's one step you have to know, and that's this guardian child. I only took one.
right. I was gonna get to that. Next step is,
Go ahead.
okay, I left these three guarded things in a
Yes,
guarded position.
yes,
But I left a cotton, let's call it an incompetent watchman
Right.
watching things that are already guarded, that are already watched.
that's correct.
So the case is the miner interfered with the watching because I left it in a position that was watched. And I
Correct.
left it, and a miner came, I don't know if I left it, I mean, you can't give a miner a watchman's responsibility, right?
That's
That-
correct.
that-
That's a
that-
given.
So he was just there and he untied the ox and he opened the bore,
Yes,
right? And the flame.
The
he
ember,
blew
the
on
ember.
flame.
and
The
he
ember,
blew on the,
blew
and
on
he
the
blew
ember.
on the ember.
Amber. So what we're saying is all three of those are perfectly analogous, right? Why should it be, so why should bore and shore you be chayav and why should aish be potter?
Exactly.
That's what we're at. Did I explain that?
You explained it exactly correct.
So
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't
it
make
doesn't
sense.
make
Okay,
Right. You agree with that, Barry? Because Barry and I discussed it last week over a nice shawarma.
Yeah, I agree with it. It doesn't make sense. Even an ember that's given. And what about the analogy to ember that on a windy day can result in a fire? So you've got to guard the ember as well.
okay. Now, that's a, gentlemen, I must admit that this Gemara has a lot of different great Rishonim like Rashi and Tosfos speaking about it, okay? And the questions that you're bringing up are questions that they're raising. And one of the methods that I'm doing is by clearly presenting the problem, you will come to the problems that Tosfos and Rashi, the Rashba, are coming to, okay? It's only a question of clear understanding the situation. So we have to talk about the ember. What is it? Is it totally watched? Can a wind blow it? How come I'm talking about the child? Why don't I just talk about an ember itself? Why do I have to talk about a child? What does this child do to the situation? Okay, we're going to have to talk about all those things very clearly. But first, I'm only going to give you the mathematical setup before we ask any difficulties. Okay, so the mathematical setup is either all three items are in a guarded state, okay? In a guarded state, okay? Are in a guarded state, okay? Okay. I didn't want to write too many words, but okay. I.e. that the ox is tied, the pit is covered and the fire is not burning, it's going to die out. Okay, it's going to die out. So they're all protected now. They're not going to, the ember's not going to do anything by itself. Let's say there's no winds. It's just going to go out in a few minutes or maybe 20 minutes. It's going to go out. Okay. On the other hand, so it doesn't make sense why you should pay in such a case. You say, why should you pay in such a case? You had the child there, you see. So now you'll tell me, oh, because the child intervened. That's what you're going to tell me, right? So if the child can intervene in the ox and the pit, he should also intervene with the ember. That's the Gemara's problem. It doesn't make sense.
But go back to the Mishnah, Rav Chaim, or
Yes.
the Brisa.
The Bryce.
The Brisa, you left it in a watched position, and someone interfered with the watched position. So why, if you left it in a watched position, why are you chayav?
Well,
You left it watched.
Because you should have known that these people are irresponsible and they are going to take things which are in a safe position and make them dangerous. You don't give.
So should the Mishnah have said that? Shouldn't the Mishnah have said if you
Excellent.
leave the shore and the bore that's covered?
Excellent.
in-
Excellent.
Or shouldn't it have said that? Because the Mishnah would have said that it's not there to confuse us. It's there to
No.
tell us the halach.
Now you have to be, this is such an important thing you're saying, you don't know.
Yeah.
This is why people have problems learning.
Yeah.
Because what happens here is that the people who have the Torah Shabbat Peh have very few words that they know what it means, if that makes any sense to you,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The Chumash simply says God is the greatest compressor of information. He says, if you don't watch your ox, you got to pay. Well, that's all he says. Okay, well, that's all he says.
that's it.
All right. Now,
Can I-
all the circumstances that little general statement can be placed in, all the context was all understood verbally in the Torah Shabbat Peh. And all that was compressed into very tight statements, which also had to be decompressed. So everybody here is writing, and that's my analogy. Einstein writes E equals mc squared. A 6-year-old kid can repeat E equals mc squared. Does he have any idea what it means? Well, maybe, yeah. Substitute E for energy, and then substitute m for mass and c for the speed of light squared. Fine, I told you what it means. Do I know what it means? If anyone tells you he knows what it means by substituting the words, he's a fool. It took Einstein 10 years and blackboards of proof to come to that conclusion. He just didn't wake up one day and said, I think I have an idea that energy should equal the mass times the speed of light squared. All right, isn't that a great idea? You believe me? Okay, you know what people will say to him? If they're good scientists, they'll say, well, you're a nice guy, Mr. Einstein, but that is the craziest thing I ever heard of. You must prove it. So he spent 10 years working on that conclusion from many, many different other people who already gave him insights into the relationship of mass and light and energy. Okay, so now this is what happens here, and this is a big problem when people, it's just a lack of knowledge. People don't understand that the Torah was given by the Almighty. It's equals mc squared. It's the height, just because every kid can read it, just like everyone could tell you, I know energy equals the mass of light squared. We don't understand, or many people don't understand, that that's highly compressed information. And the decompression formula analogs was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave it to Yeshua and all the people, and passed it down all the way to our present generation. What happened was, in the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he said, wait a minute, I got to write down the basic format or else it's finished. I got to write down the formula. No one will understand it at all. They'll think that's all there is a Chumash. They won't know all the details. So I'm going to write down the basic formula. He writes down the Mishnah.
Does the owner not take responsibility for the quality of the people that are the watchers?
The
That's what he's
normal,
saying. Yeah.
that's
Other way-
exactly, that's exactly it. You must take responsibility.
Okay,
So if you have to
That-
take responsibility, how come you don't have to pay when he had the ember in his hand? That's the problem.
because you're equating the fact that that child is not capable of doing that.
That's correct. If he's incapable of guarding, so then how could you ever say that you don't have to pay? That's the problem. That's problem number one. And certainly if it was dangerous, how would you say you don't have to pay? We can't understand what the Bryce has said. It doesn't make any sense to us. To the Gemara, it makes no sense. The Gemara is struggling to understand what this Bryce means.
But what if you make the assumption that the child can't blow on it or doesn't have the knowledge or understanding?
Okay,
That-
very, very good. Even if you say that, now this is something that I wanted to bring up to you. See, I have to spend a lot of time explaining these things because they're not just apparent to the first time shot. So here, I'm not going to go into all the details again, but I'm just going to I'll go to this other diagram here, you see? This diagram here, you say, wow, what are you doing to me? Why am I hanging? You're driving me crazy. No, I'm trying to have you learn how to analyze. So here is a book called Sefer Gayon by the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and he breaks down cause. He tells you all the theoretical problems or divisions of cause. And he says cause has external and internal causes. Okay, I have to explain this, take the whole shiur just to explain this. But what I want to show you a little bit is when it comes to cause, like say we have the showman here, there's what causes a showman? What causes a good watcher? How do you know if you have a good watcher? Okay, so there's certain criteria. He has to be of age, he can't be mentally deranged, he has to have all his senses, right? He can't see. Those are the criteria. That's what we're going to call here a siba moletis, okay? That means what creates a good watcher, okay? Watchman, okay. That's called a siba moletis. What do I need to create, to initialize, to make a good? Now, there's another step. Sometimes I need not only the creation of a watcher, but I have to make sure that that watcher will exist over time, right? So, for instance, that's called the siba mekayemis. I can have a watchman, right? And I know that he's after 20 minutes he's going to get hungry and he's going to run over to the kiosk and buy a soda. I don't want a guy like that. I want a guy who's not only good in the moment but also over time. That's called a siba mekayemis. And the third type of siba that the Ramchal talks about is what's called a siba mafsedis. I want to make sure that there's no nothing around that's going to destroy his ability to watch. Okay, so I have to have, in our case, when we're talking about the watcher, okay, the watchman, okay. So a child, you cannot initiate a child into the position of watching. He doesn't have the mental capacities. He's just like the insane person or the deaf person. He definitely can't speak. They don't have the capability, so you can't make them a watcher, right? There's another problem that even if you could make them a watcher, that they, let's say let's say with this ember, right? Let's say with the ember doesn't, yeah, that's a very interesting what we're doing. We're talking about the item being watched and the watcher, okay? So let's talk, if you're talking about the watcher himself, you need someone who has the capability over time and that there's nothing that's going to distract him from watching. If you're talking about the item he has to watch, right, it has to be, it's either dangerous or not dangerous, and it has to be continuous or not continuous. Okay, now why am I bringing this to you? This is what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying like this. Now, let me just go back to the Gemara here. And none of this is written down. It's all things you have to understand through a rational understanding of analysis. Okay, so let's go over here. A guardian, you have to know, is never, a child is never a good guardian by definition. So you can never have, if you need something to be guarded, he's not going to do the job. So let's talk about Siva Moletus. It means you can't take him and make him a guardian. Okay. Now, the child has two problems. Not only is he's not a good guardian, but he's disruptive. Okay. That means not only can he guard properly, but he can also disrupt. He could take something that's innocuous and take a rock that's innocuous and throw it into his neighbor's. Okay. So there's two things that are upsetting with a child. One, he doesn't have the knowledge to properly guard something. And two, he can disrupt guarded things. That's what a child is. Okay, that's what he can do. So if, as a guardian, he's never a good guardian. So if he's given things which are covered or an ember, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, he doesn't have to be a good guardian because they are in a position of being watched. But you'll say, well, look at the other aspect of a child. He can take things which are watched and destroy them, disrupt them. So he can take the pit and uncover it, and he can take the ember and blow it up. So that there's two strikes against the child. One, that he's not a good guardian, and two, that he's a disruptor of properly guarded objects. Okay. Now, when it comes to things being uncovered or untied or aflame, the only problem is that he's a bad guardian. It's already disruptive. I mean, you're giving someone a danger, like a kid a loaded gun, you better watch out, and things can happen. So the only problem is the distinction is that the child is, not that he's going to intervene per se, he's just going to watch the wind will come and the unguarded fire will start moving, and the kid will just look at it and so isn't that nice? It's going to the neighbor's property. He won't do because he can't guard. Okay, so the Gemara wants to say, so we can't figure out the circumstances of this situation that we're letting a child guard. If the circumstances are that it's all covered up, then he can disrupt. And if it's not all covered up, he's a kid. He's not going to guard properly. So he's either disruptive or he can't guard properly. Those are the two aspects. Okay, no matter which way you turn it, it's not going to work. If he's disruptive, then he should pay in both cases, both the ember and the pit. And if he's not a good guard, then certainly if it's not covered and it's a flame, he should pay. So that is the dilemma that the Gemara presents. How does it solve the dilemma? It says, let's go back to the guarded objects. Okay. And let's look, instead of the child, let's look at the object itself. The object itself, i.e. the shore, has a natural tendency to become untied, not because the kid will do it, just because the movement of the shore, of the ox with the tied chain or rope, eventually these things break. Okay, so you can't give a child even to watch it because he's not going to be responsible to watch, because it's the item is going to go from a safe position to an unsafe position. Okay, but when you give him an ember, so then he's not going to. Now this is very interesting about disruption. Since it's going to go out, most kids won't disrupt it. That's what you want to say. It's not interesting to them, an ember. It could mean that he could blow it. It's a possibility. So, but there you could say that an ember already, it's going to go out. So it's not, the kid is not going to interfere with it. It's not exciting, and it's eventually going out. That's all. So with the ox, the item itself will turn dangerous, and with the fire, the ember, the item itself will get more and more less dangerous. So the kid, the child there is good in one, is bad in one, good in the other. He's not going to run to you and tell you that the ox is untied because he's a kid. And the ember was going to go out, so he doesn't have to go and tell you about it. So this is what I wrote here in the conclusion. This is not easy, my friends. Okay, went over time all, but here's the conclusion. Here's the conclusion, okay? I wrote like this. The ox is really tied and the pit is covered, and he pays. Why? A tied ox unties itself, and a covered pit naturally becomes uncovered. When animals walk over a pit, it naturally loosens and it becomes uncovered. Consequently, both need guarding, and the child is not a good guard. You thought that if it was covered, you thought if the pit was covered and the ox was tied, it didn't need any guarding at all. And the answer is it does need guarding because it can become untied. So therefore, consequently, both of them need guarding. The ember, however, is exempt because an ember extinguishes itself. Instead of getting worse, it gets less. And there, consequently, it does not need guarding at all because it's going to go out. And a child is not needed, and therefore the child is not needed to guard. Okay, that's going to be the conclusion. So what I'll do here is, why do I laugh? Because it's a very deep point here. I mean, we have to go through this analysis carefully. So I would like you to go over my little, I'm going to save these and I'll put them on the site. Go over it, speak with your friends, try to understand what went on, read the Gemara itself, it's all here. And then next week, we'll try to clarify this even more, okay? Because as I said, this is a classic case of Gemara. It's looking at the same information in different aspects, and then telling you what we call a chiddush din. It's telling you something that you wouldn't have thought that you would be obligated for is obligated. That's called a new din. Okay, but it's not easily apparent. So I'll spend one more class on it, then I'll go to the next case. But it's well worth your time if you speak with each other or look at it yourself and try to analyze the 4 steps in the Gemara, okay, which is the Mishnah, the Bryce's clarification, the Gemara's elucidation, and the Gemara's final resolution. If you can get those 4 steps down, you'll see that you'll be far, far ahead of the game when it comes to many Gemaras, because this format of elucidation through dilemma is something that happens many, many, many times. So if you get it straight, you'll be able to apply it and to understand it, and also to predict what the Gemara is going to do. Because when you're impaled on a dilemma, we said there's only 2 things you can do. You can either go through the middle, or you can grab the bull by the horns. So let's stop at this point. We did quite a lot, and I'll stop the recording here. Let's see. Okay, let me see if I can do that. It's not very